The metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to become the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing this promise to life. Join thought leaders Matthew Canterman, CFA, the Director of Research at Ball Metaverse Research Partners, and Jonathan Raz-Friedman, founder and CEO of Super Social, as they interview the brilliant minds building, shaping, and investing in the metaverse.
Welcome to episode 15 of Into the Metaverse second season. Today we're diving into the intersection of blockchain and the metaverse with a wonderful guest. Joining us is Christine Renee Perry from Skale Lab. Christine is the VP of Global Solutions Engineering at Skale Labs. Her main responsibility is to manage customer success journey, pre and post sales, including developer custom integration, prototypes, and more. She's held a number of roles previously at various tech companies, including Optimizely, Mixpanel, Oracle, and Mbrain, which was acquired by Cisco. Welcome, Christine. Pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, so diving right in, Christine, before we get into the weeds of Skale and Web3 and kind of giving a bit of context to the audience about that, we'd like to start with our favorite first question, which we ask all guests. It helps us to kind of get to some level of consensus in this journey of building the metaverse is building the metaverse and reaching a consensus to get to the metaverse. So that's kind of why we're doing this. So as a software engineer by trade, maybe your answer will give us yet another flavor to that question that is a bit even more nuanced than previous guests. But how do you define the metaverse, what it is, and perhaps no less importantly, what it is not?
Oh, wow. So that's a fun question. I love it though, because when I think of the metaverse, I think of it being like a collision between virtual reality meets augmented reality. And like from what I've seen, it has an aim at being like really inclusive to all types of communities. And it gives a community like opportunity to collaborate and participate in the metaverse in really fun and unique ways. And I think what makes it really exciting is that when you layer Web3 over top of it, because I'm now in a Web3 space, you bring in like another key component, which is ownership. And Web2 didn't really focus on ownership. It was more just taking the data away from you and giving it away. When you have ownership over everything, including your own identity within the metaverse, magic happens. And we've seen that, I think, with blockchain and NFTs core principles, like being ownership and having that front and center. It leads to really creative ways of expanding the metaverse. And so I'm really excited to see where this actually takes the metaverse community.
I think something you hit on is really important, and it's something we've talked about a lot. And, my now boss, Matthew Ball, has written about this in his book, is that beyond just the technology, the metaverse is also a social movement. You talked about human interactions and bringing people together. And I think when we talk about the metaverse, everyone immediately goes to Snow Crash and, Neil Stevenson, who's also on our podcast with VR and the Oasis and Ready Player One and locking yourself away from society. But in reality, I think for a lot of us that are in this space, we see this as the next evolution of human social interaction on the internet. And when you talk about it from that perspective, that gets me excited, because I think we are starting to build a consensus around there's more to this than just a VR headset.
Right. And I think, before the metaverse, like having, the likes of Facebook and Twitter, the current Web2 ways of social interaction, it's kind of started a blueprint of like what is possible. And then what happens if you kind of take away some of the friction points or the things people don't like about those communities. And here we have the metaverse where it's aiming to do that. And I think what's really cool is that you have so many different types of communities looking to contribute and make the social interaction something that everyone's going to love. So yeah, I like your idea idea of looking beyond just like the virtual reality Ready Player One, which is an awesome movie and book, by the way. But moving beyond that, and I think thinking about how to just like make people happy with their identities that they can hold on to in the metaverse is great.
And when we talk about the identity, which is such an important piece of not only the ownership, but the way people are going to experience something like the metaverse, something like, an immersive 3D internet, what do you think makes blockchain such an important technology to enable that next iteration of identity and personal expression over the internet?
Yeah, I think, just wanted to draw back the previous point too, so I can start there. I think the striking difference between Web 2 and Web 3 are, the ownership around that identities piece. And what blockchain has done was like, okay, this is one of our core principles. Let's make sure that that is going to be the first thing that we sort of introduce into the metaverse. And in doing so, what you saw is this amazing NFT boom. It was the year of the artists. Everyone that was an artist was able to look at the NFT space, create an art, and create like a collection that they would be able to allow people to pretty much like buy into the identities that they want within the metaverse. And so I thought that that was a really great step in the right direction with having the NFT space and the really creative like mind space take the leap and make that possible. So I'd say that that's a really great way that NFT space has helped drive it in the right direction. And I think, with blockchain, just the idea of having your identity not able to be taken from you, because once it's stored, something is stored on the blockchain, it's immutable. And I think that that is also something that is going to be different than what we've seen in the past. In the past, identities can be stolen all over the place, mainly because the keys are not owned by you. The keys to your identity are owned by another service that is allowing you to borrow that identity, if you will. Blockchain has said, no, you hold on to your keys, you keep them safe. And these keys are basically your way of making sure that your identity stays with you for the long haul. And so I think those are really two great ways that it's definitely helped the metaverse space advance around the identity idea anyway.
I think that's, we talk a lot about identity, digital identity, ownership of your virtual self or selves, because there might be multiple different versions of you in the metaverse potentially. And, when we think about Web 2, when we think about these large platforms today, I still can't call it meta platforms. I have to call it Facebook. Sorry, Mark. When we think about Google, Alphabet, I still can't do that either. We think about Apple. They're the ones that control your personal, data from the internet, or the banking companies and Equifax. Remember when Equifax got hacked and 150 million people's social security numbers were on the internet? I mean, these are the type of things that we still really haven't fixed. We just hope doesn't happen again. And so hopefully, potentially, we talked about this with Udi Shapiro in an earlier episode, is can we create a quasi-governmental ID that lives on the blockchain, that's unique, that's protected and owned by individuals? I think that's kind of one of the holy grails of what we're building to, because now we can take back ownership of what's never been owned by individuals in the past.
I want to touch on something you said there, because I think that's really interesting. When you mentioned, the hack with Equifax and your identity was broadcast to the world. It's almost as if with blockchain that's impossible. It's not that hacks don't happen within blockchain, they do. But when stuff is exposed about that hack, it's not about your identity was taken and now someone has access to it. Your keys are still yours, and you're still able to move forward with your identity. We're able to move forward from that hack. With the hacks, previously in Web 2 days, essentially specifically what you were talking about with Equifax, when a hack happens, no, you have to build safeguards around yourself because now you're completely exposed to the world. And I think that that's a really important difference with the direction that we're trying to push this with the metaverse.
Matthew, I think this is a great segue to maybe talk a bit more about Skale.
Absolutely. So let's go right into it. So for those that are maybe less initiated, like myself, I don't know too much about Skale. Yeah. Maybe give us the 101 on Skale. For those that don't know, they have their own token which supports their blockchains. The SKL token has a market cap of about $200 million. Again, I'm a finance guy, so I care about these things. But maybe tell us more about Skale as a platform, and what differentiates Skale from other blockchain solutions. I think is really important for our listeners.
Yeah, I think One of the cool things about the Scale network and the community at large is that it's really aimed on focusing on creating a better user experience to enable like massive adoption across the blockchain space. And when I think about that, it's kind of like creating the grandma effect. Essentially, if you build an application that your grandmother can use, obviously that's also going to mean that you have many other users that are able to pick it up and simply run with that application. And so a lot of the focus that we do is on helping projects that are building on top of Scale think about user experience and make sure that that is front and center when they're building on top of the platform. And so, when we think about that as like being one of the main vision points, we want all users to be able to use Web3 in some capacity. What Skale does for developers is offer an infrastructure or building blocks for them to be able to do that. And so getting into a little bit of the technical weeds for what is offered to developers, that's going to be, the zero gas fee. Well, what is gas fee if you're not into Web3? Basically, it's taking the idea of you have to pay for the transactions that are done within that application instead of the application taking ownership of those transactions for you. And I think that that creates friction. And when you create friction for users that aren't used to that, their initial reaction is going to be to back away. And so one of the first things that Scale set out to do is to make sure that the end user sees zero transaction fees. And so what that does for the developer is it allows them to build their application exactly how they want with user experience front and center. What's really great too is that a lot of the first times people interact with blockchain, they see it being extremely slow. And so that was the second thing that Scale set out to do, was to make sure that transactions run extremely fast. So that way you're able to build an application that operates just like all the Web2 applications you see today, and it's not quote unquote a blockchain application where when you say that, people automatically think it's going to be slow. Not in the case of developing on top of Scale. So I think that that's going to be, the main hitting points on what Scale has to offer. It's really an infrastructure layer for developers, but in doing that, it becomes a better user experience for all the end users out there.
I think one of the things you just touched upon is one of the most important things that we talk about at the intersection of Web3 and the metaverse on this podcast a lot is most Web3 users are crypto natives, probably all of them, right? As, the grandma effect that hasn't really existed in Web3 yet, right? We really haven't had the average person get involved. And if they did, they probably got their face ripped off in the last 6 months. So they're probably out of it by now, right? And so, just financially. And so, when we think about whether it's Web3 gaming, Web3 metaverse platforms, financial applications, the onboarding process for normies, if we want to call them that, or non-crypto natives, is not ideal. You need like 6 different wallets. You got to know how to sync them. You got to move assets. You pay gas fees to move things. So I have to, pay money before I can do anything. You want to play Axie, you got to go spend $1,000 on a bunch of these, NFTs before I can even play a game. Like that's expensive. That's not ideal. So, just diving in more into that point, how do we get, instead of having tens of thousands of users in Web3, how do we get tens of millions or billions of users using Web3 applications?
I think it's removing exactly the problem that you just outlined. The fact that, Web3 native users, they're used to the friction, so they accept the friction. New users are not going to accept that, and so they instantly back off. And so it's kind of removing a lot of the cool features that we think are cool, but are really just adding more friction or hurdles for people to actually enter and use the applications is the way to go. And, what Skale is setting out to do is offer a platform for developers to be able to do that. And so if you don't, just touching on the gas cost piece, if you remove that and you don't have a gas cost, you don't have to expose that to the user as something they have to overcome. Essentially, you're able to present them with an application that has blockchain running in the background, and the user doesn't even have to know. It doesn't mean that you take away their ownership of their keys. You can definitely still, expose that to them. But there's a time when you can expose that to them. Does it have to be when they first touch their application? Probably not. And if the answer is no, then what you're able to do is still keep the ownership theirs. And then when they decide that they are ready to dive in and learn more and take ownership and completely dive into the Web3 space, they can make that decision and then run with the application as a native Web3 application. And so I'm seeing more and more applications that start that way, where their focus is on making sure that they win most of the Web2 space, which is not going to happen if you require them to download the application in their browser, understand the wallet, do 50 steps before you even use the application. It's just not going to happen. And changing that focus to focusing on Web2 first, and then also making sure they're building in the building blocks for Web3 to be able to still adopt the application, it means that you're kind of building for both worlds. And then building for both worlds, it means that we will reach, those billion of users that you mentioned.
I have a kind of a principled question, right? Because I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But if we look at Web 2, one of the reasons why companies like Facebook, like Google, like Amazon, and others became so strong and big, obviously they had the network effect working in their favor and controlling the data. But at the core of what happened when they started, they took a certain use case and they really removed all the friction of how people interact with that type of content. And that ultimately led to this really, really large centralized platform to emerge. And so my question is, and I don't know if you have the answer, this is more of a conversation. How do we make sure that there are going to be companies that are going to remove that friction that we just described with Web3, the wallets, the keys, like for Web3 to have 2 billion users, a billion, even 100 million, all of that thing is going to have to be frictionless, not only because it makes sense, but also the entire world is used to frictionless internet experience. No one is going to want to come back. It's exactly the same thing with climate change. It's so difficult to explain why we need to stop using fossil fuels, but this is what people have been doing for 100 years. It's so much to do and change. And with climate change, however, it's existential, even though to some people it may not be existential, but it is. And I think with Web3, we're talking about a different internet, a better internet, a decentralized internet. And so there are going to be teams, organizations, companies that are removing that friction. How do we know, or how do we make sure that once that friction is removed and we have these services in and of themselves, they don't become, again, centralized services, and then we kind of miss the whole point of a decentralized internet? I didn't mean to put you against the wall. It's a very big question that probably no one can answer at the moment. I'm just curious because you're living in this space, with what you guys are building at Scale Labs. So I'm just curious if you or Scale Labs as a company has a point of view about that.
Yeah, when I think about it, I'm drawing from the Scale community and what they often, express to us that they want, which is governance. And when you introduce governance into any application or any community, it means that you don't just have a small mindset that is setting the rules and running with it, which can lead to disastrous things. Leaning on what you mentioned with like Web2, like how do we actually prevent that from becoming centralized? And the more and more that you can encourage communities to fully decentralize and also leverage governance to make sure that everyone becomes a stakeholder, everyone has a voice at the table, it definitely helps move it in the right direction. Now, I think you're right. It's very hard to answer that question outright, but governance is a tool that we haven't yet broached in this conversation, which I think is very powerful. And you see that currently with just the Ethereum ecosystem. Governance drives so many of the changes that they have right now. People are able to submit all sorts of proposals and then rally behind that as a community. And we see that now with the upcoming merge that's about to happen with Ethereum, because it was wanted, desired, and then pushed forward by the community. And then, yes, like you can't prevent everything. There's still going to be, applications that are going to try to make centralized, communities within a decentralized space. But I think it's up to the community to decide whether or not they want to, accentuate like what's happening there and adopt that specific platform over another more decentralized one. And I think the decentralized platforms will win out over the centralized ones will win out over the centralized ones, mainly because what we're seeing in the community and the wider adoption of blockchain is that the community is saying, yes, I do want that ownership. I do want my voice to be heard. And so I am going to drive forward and drive closer to those decentralized communities, but more the ones that are still removing a little bit of that friction for me. So
I think that was phrased eloquently, actually, the way you kind of talked about that. One of my big concerns about the state of Web3 today is because it is still really early. I mean, Bitcoin really started in 2012, but really we've been building kind of the protocols for a lot of DeFi and games and metaverse really only 5 years. We talked about this with Tim O'Reilly a few episodes ago. Before we had the dot-com crash, we had been building protocols on the internet for 20 years. And we haven't seen the same influx of capital on the financial side from venture funds, PE, whatever, in the internet this early on as we're seeing in Web3. And I've been using this term. I'm afraid we're going to end up with Web A16Z. We're just going to end up with new centralized platforms as opposed to having this vision of decentralization. I don't necessarily know an answer to that. I don't expect anyone to have an answer to that. But, I think there was an example a few months ago where there was a tech CEO who created an NFT, and only when you viewed it in a specific, wallet did it turn into a poop emoji. And basically showed that you don't actually know what you own because you're not accessing it directly on the blockchain. You're accessing it through OpenSea or MetaMask or whatever. And so that's the new centralized platform because you only own what you think you own because of them. So, I think to your point, governance and giving people an ownership stake, and not just an ownership stake, but really a true one voice, one vote mentality is really how we help to kind of bring people into decentralized platforms over time.
Makes sense.
And so, obviously we're in what some people refer to at the moment, Christine, as sort of crypto winter, whatever that means. But, we're in a downturn, okay? And as someone who is working to keep building in this space, you have organizations, businesses, developer community who are involved in building on top of the Skale solution. How do you motivate your teams, and how do you effectively drive more client engagement with this, quite tough backdrop, not just from a performance standpoint, but also from a reputation, PR, adoption? Is it more difficult to get interest in working with Skale right now? Does it provide actually advantages that you can focus on, quote unquote, real builders versus too opportunistic ones? Would love for you to kind of unpack how Skale operates at the moment within the current atmosphere and dynamics of the market.
Mm-hmm. I think, this is not the first crypto winter that we've seen. But I think what's exciting about building during crypto winter, as you mentioned, is that, yes, there is quite a bit of focus on those that are actually building within the space. And so it does remove quite a bit of the noise. But I think, I'm focusing on those that are invested in developing the blockchain ecosystem, then it means that we're able to build a better blockchain for tomorrow. And so I think that's one of the key differences, right? When we think about crypto winter, you kind of have to separate it. There's a difference between being invested in crypto and being invested in developing the blockchain ecosystem. And I joined the blockchain ecosystem because that's what I wanted to focus on. That's what I wanted to develop. And so at Skale, what we are focused on as a community is making sure that we build the key infrastructures today that will create wider user adoption for tomorrow. And I think, right now we're not seeing any difference in the amount of outreach for projects that want to continue building, because all of the projects are doing the exact same thing. They're like, okay, great, I can now focus on just building. And so we didn't see a decline at all as far as engagement. And so it makes it so that way we don't necessarily have to spend any energy on keeping anyone focused, whether within the team or externally within the community, because everyone is just focused on making sure that we continue with the vision that was set out to be completed by Skale Labs.
Yeah, I like what you said. When we think about just people that are in this to make money from crypto prices going up, when moon memes and whatnot, right? They're the ones that are going to go away now, hopefully, theoretically. And we talked about this, or it's going to be in a future episode, but we had a nice conversation around what can we do with blockchain that we couldn't do before. And these are the type of solutions that are going to be most powerful. And so I think those are the type of things that in this environment can actually be built. Because looking at the last few years of Web3 gaming, I'm big in the gaming community. everyone's like, gamers don't like NFTs. No, gamers don't like pay to win games. And every single Web3 game out there is pretty much a pay to win casino. And so, and you've seen this before. We saw it with Star Wars Battlefront 2 in 2016. We've seen it with Diablo 3 with the marketplace and trading, right? As soon as you put in pay to win mechanics, gamers don't like it. And so it's not that gamers don't like NFTs in Web3. They just don't like pay to win. And everything was over financialization of gaming in this sense. We've seen it in other aspects of technology as well, where these types of people that are in it to make a quick buck have figured out or tried to figure out ways to over financialize things. And so I think what you're saying around working with companies, working with developers, that how can we natively take advantage of blockchain technology and put that into, whether it's a social application, whether it's a game, whether it's a financial application, whatever it is, we've got to reduce the friction, as you talked about, but build the railroads for the technology stack, so that way we can get the next billion people into this.
Right. And I think too, to make sure we're adding a positive spin on it, it's not that, during crypto winter that we're saying we don't want you to be successful. And there is an understanding that so much of success is tied into financial gain. But if you sort of think about success as being so much more than that, we're thinking about the success of, making sure that users get a problem that they're looking to be solved. And within the gaming community, it is figuring out, well, how can we create better Web3 games that aren't just, the models that you described, where it's always just play to earn, but it's a game that gamers will love to play that is built on top of Web3 technology. And in other spaces, it's very similar. It's just like, how do you focus on, again, tying back to some of our previous conversation, removing that friction for your end users, so that way you're solving a problem to make sure that they can actually onboard to your application seamlessly. And so with crypto winter, it definitely gives an opportunity to focus on that and make sure that the team, the communities, is all rallying behind that focus of success.
No, I appreciate that. And, I know I sound negative sometimes. I try to be realistic because I've talked to game developers and people that make AAA games, it takes 3 to 5 years, if you've done it before, to make a AAA quality game. And we have people that are trying to spin stuff around in 6 months and that just got into Web3. Hey, we're going to make a game we're going to make a metaverse in 6 months. We talked about this when we talked about Yuga Labs and other side. And it's like, they showed a tech demo, which wasn't even their own tech. And I'd rather have them said, okay, we raised all this money, both from VCs, from land sales and token sales. Now we're going to go spend 3 to 5 years and actually build this thing. We'll come back to you then. And, I think this is kind of where the disconnect is. And, to quote Alan Greenspan, rational expectations, what's realistic that can be done in a realistic time frame. And so working with real developers that understand that these things take time, that are in it for the long haul to make this, to drive adoption is what's exciting to me. And so although I sound negative about it, I'm actually excited about it.
And Matthew, I thought you sound realistic about it. I was worried I sounded negative. So wanted to clear that up.
Well, to enable the future, we're going to need, a combination of sort of relentless optimism with pragmatism. It's not just going to be this. I think if we look at what has happened over the past 2 years, it's been only optimism, right? It's going to go up and to the right, not just in crypto, in general in the market. And, we just saw Shopify today lay off 10% of the workforce, 1,000 people, 1,000 jobs. No one is immune. And a lot of things that people assumed are just going to continue to go up and to the right really has changed, because we live in truly unprecedented times with really so much uncertainty, economically, politically, geopolitically, and technologically. From a society perspective, there's a lot of confusion. What is all of these technologies are going to do, and how is it going to make life better for us? And so I think we're just in these really, really challenging times. But, in my mind, the metaverse is that, beacon of light of how we can continue and create human progress and prosperity, and, as you said earlier, inclusivity, and building an internet that continues to evolve and provides more opportunities for people to connect, to commerce, to socialize, to play, to work, to learn, to express themselves, which is one of the fundamental things we've described about the promise of the metaverse and how Web3 could bring a sense of ownership alongside the expression. It's almost like it's an expression you actually own, right? Versus an expression that is owned by someone else because it's locked in a platform. And so, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, and I think this is part of the, this is part of the journey.
Great. I think that was really beautifully said. A beacon of light, moving in the right direction.
Well,
So,
But let's just also put it this way, look at kind of the last two big financial crashes, right? If you look at the global financial crisis, Uber, Lyft, all these fantastic companies, well, some people say they're fantastic, really great, entrepreneurs built really great businesses out of that crisis. It wasn't exactly right away, but kind of Facebook and Google really started to grow out of the tech crash, out of the dot-com crash, right? And so, Amazon really took off as well, even though it existed beforehand. So, back to what we were talking about, even though things might be not as optimistic as they were, this is the time when the next great crop of companies, whether it's Web3, whether it's the metaverse, and we've talked about this a lot, that who's going to be the leaders in the metaverse, they might not exist yet. The companies that might be the Facebook and the Google and the Apple of the metaverse may not even exist yet, and they might just be funded now. It might just be an idea. And so, for entrepreneurs, people looking to build something for a decade, this is still the time to be doing it.
great. I think I often say this to the team internally, there's beauty in chaos. And so developing during this beautiful chaotic time, what we're seeing is that there are projects that are not afraid to launch, like during crypto winter, which I think is very powerful, because that what they're saying with that statement is that, yes, I am worried about the success of the company and I want to make sure that I can launch now and start to reach adoption now and not wait until crypto winter is over. And so definitely would love to see like more of that, more projects just like launching like now and not delaying it, because I think another time is going to be better. Because I think, it's wasting valuable time by delaying a launch by, we don't know how long it's going to last. And so you could be waiting for a few months or, a few years. And so it's better to just like build your project, start to launch now, lean mentalities, get the product out there, get adoption, and yeah. And
nothing wrong with a bit of sort of resilience and financial prudence when it comes to building something new. And so I think this is a great note to finish on. Christine from Scale Lab inviting all of you to just keep building. And Matthew and I also invite everyone to just keep building, keep your head down, create things that matter, create things that bring value. And, we're at the very, very, very early stages of the emergence of, this next iteration of the internet. So, Christine, thank you so much for joining us. And we really enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys. I'll see you in the metaverse.